and economics there. We have about 220 million children who go to school. And of the 220 million children who go to school, around 14 million reach college. About almost 200 million never reach college. Now, in the years to come, we need to increase our gross enrollment ratio from 14 to 30%. We'll have another 25 to 30 million children going to college by the end of 2020. And then those people will go into higher education. But there'll still be 150,000 people, children, who will not be going to college, even by 2020, even if we have a gross enrollment ratio of 30%. Now, these people will have to get employed, because you can't have 150 million children unemployed in the streets of India. So you'll have to give them courses of skill development so that they can be absorbed in the economy. But most absorption in the economy will take place in the manufacturing sector, because that's the sector where the economy has the capacity to absorb the maximum people. And the manufacturing sector therefore has to be given a fillip. And without power, there can be no manufacturing. So you now have a relationship between power, manufacturing, and education straight away. Has anybody really dealt with the economics of this? I don't think there are studies in India which look at the interlinkage between energy, manufacturing, and education. Now, these are the areas that we would like institutions like the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research to look at and to produce studies for us, and do research for us, to figure out as to what are the economic objectives in terms of our developmental path. How do you reach there? And what is the linkage between law and that economic objective? And I dare say that the rationale for an entire education reform system is based to achieve that objective. Because if we want skill development to take place, and if we want people to go into higher education, and if we want larger economic development, then we need to not just invest in education, but we need to release the energies of students by reforming the entire education structure. In other words, to liberalize it, to make our universities more independent, to allow them to function without government control and government restraints, to allow the academic councils and the executive councils to function as independent organizations who collaborate with the university system to take the agenda of education forward, to allow universities to be standalone research institutions rather than just affiliating institutions, affiliating 5,000, 10,000 colleges. Really, what that means is that the university system is only catering to setting examination papers and examining college students rather than doing their focused work on research, which is what the university is meant to do. Which means that we need to actually reform the entire system through legal procedures. But this is not with respect to education alone. It has a direct impact on the future of economic development in India. Because as you know, the difference between the developed world and the developing world is not that America or the United States of America has a GDP of $14 trillion and that India has a GDP of 1 trillion. No, that's not the difference. The difference is that the gross enrollment ratio in America is 70%, whereas in India it's 14%. Because all your wealth is produced in the university system. And unless you get kids onto the university system, the nation will not produce wealth. So it's not balance sheets, it's not your profit and loss account of a company, it is not your big industrial houses, it's not your resources, it's not minerals, it's not oil. It's really human, the quality of human resource that is the real fuel for the economy. And what is the relationship with that between that quality of human resource and economic development in several sectors and subsectors of the economy is the real challenge that we need to address, which we are not addressing. The challenge for Europe would be different, because Europe has reached a certain level of economic development where the nature of challenge will be entirely different. The challenge for Africa will be entirely different. The challenge for South Asia would be different. The challenge for East Asia would be different. Because ultimately that challenge will depend on the development of society and the levels of development of society in the context in the geopolitical context. So you need to understand the social milieu of a nation, which is also reflected through its laws. You need to understand how to change that to cater for economic prosperity. They need to understand in what manner the laws should be changed, because the nature of change will have to be different again, depending on where you are located. And then what kind of change, the quality of change. I mean, the small island states will have a different plan of economic development, and their nature would be entirely different from land masses like China and India. And so the nature of the economic solutions would be different, and the relationship between economics and law would be different. So let me go back to the equation that I was going to put forth before you of the relationship between energy, manufacturing, education, and ultimately from there you come to resources, water, environment, minerals, huge impact of law with reference to those resources, and of the economic objectives with reference to the use of those resources. That's another area, and this is a holistic pattern. There's a linkage between all these things that we need to understand. We need to understand the economics of it, and we need to understand the sociology of it, and of course the legal concepts that are required, and the requirement of change that will bring about economic activity. So I think that in a sense all disciplines are interdependent, and therefore all knowledge is holistic. In a sense all knowledge is interdisciplinary. But law and economics have a very special relationship, because both are rooted in society. One reflects the social milieu of society, the other reflects the impact of that social milieu on economic prosperity, and the nature of the problem existing on the ground, and the analysis of that problem, and then solutions through law and economics to ultimately reach the common man for the benefit of the common man. And I think these are some very important issues that need to be addressed by academic institutions. Now, of course, nowadays in our law schools, economics, I believe, is a core subject which is taught. But what I don't understand is as to why our law schools have not developed the kind of research programs that need to be developed in these particular areas. I think they do great service to India if you have postgraduate programs which are focused on these particular issues. This whole issue, if you talk about budgeting in the 21st century, slowly, you're going to move on to a debate, a global debate that's going to take place as to what then is the ultimate aim of economic development. Economic development to be sustainable has necessarily to look at different yardsticks which measure the nature and quality of that development, depending on the aim of society. And that's a different study altogether. How do you then bring about green technologies? How do you make development sustainable? Somebody may say that you can set up 1,000 or 10,000 megawatts of power, but see the impact of that, long-term impact of that on society. And down the road, this rather development at breakneck speed in the long term is destructive of the index of happiness that the society seeks to grasp. I think we need to have an economic analysis of that. So in other words, how to make development sustainable. And then, of course, that brings us to the debate of green technologies and use of resources in a manner that is sustainable. And that brings us to a whole debate on the economics of fossil fuels and how you use them. And then you talk about the economics of solar power. And then you weigh your options as a society, you weigh your options and you decide which is the best way to move forward. And I think it's the lawyers and the economists that will actually decide for society as to the way forward. Do you take build 6-lane highways or 8-lane highways and move forward, or do you sort of first ensure that the 8-lane highway has traffic that is sustainable? I don't know the answer, but I think these are questions that I, as a citizen of this country, not as a minister, ask myself every day and say, I don't know the answer. And I'm here in the Erasmus Mundus program, inaugurating it, in the hope that in the years to come, I will get at least some of these answers. Thank you very much.
I now invite Professor Madhan Menon to give his address.
Professor Radhakrishna, Professor Mahendra Dev, Professor Schaefer, Professor Babu, members of the faculty of IGIDR, the students attending this program. As Schaefer has just said, we have assembled to celebrate India joining the Erasmus Mundus Masters program in Law and Economics in a formal sense, with the inauguration by the Honorable Minister of this first ever program being held in India at IGIDR. As he narrated, this is the culmination of a series of interactions starting from 1980s, and the driving force behind it, Professor Schaefer himself from Germany and Professor Babu from IGIDR, and has successfully culminated in this agreement, and hereafter I'm sure it will pick up the momentum and achieve those goals which the Minister has charted out for us to develop in the field of law and economic scholarship. I congratulate both Schaefer and Babu, IGIDR and Mahendra Dev, and I assure them that there are several law schools looking forward to join in your research agenda and also the teaching and training programs, so that the legal community will get the benefit of this new scholarship, this hybrid scholarship of law and economics. The Honorable Minister spoke about the symbiotic relationship between law and economics, something very special. I think it was so recognized right from the start of the Indian Republic. But unfortunately, the academic community did not acknowledge that and prepare their agenda of teaching and research to advance that scholarship. I say this because of my own introduction to law and economics came through 3 or 4 episodes that happened in our legal and constitutional history. In the very first year after independence, when the Zamindari Abolition Act was challenged in the court, the key question that arose was the compensation payable when private property was acquired for a public purpose. And the interpretation that the Zamindars wanted was market price for the land acquired. This was not the intention of Parliament or even the constitution makers, nor would the constitution would allow that sort of a thing. So it was argued on behalf of the government that what was expected was a reasonable amount adjudged by an independent authority as compensation for the land acquired. But lo and behold, there are several lawyers, including Palkhiwala, who argued that giving anything less than the market price is a fraud on the Constitution. You know, as a result of the Supreme Court striking down the constitutional validity of Zamindari Abolition Act, we had to bring in constitutional amendments. Panditji spoke in Parliament at that time whether the legal and judicial community are living in ivory towers and are not aware of the purpose of the land reform laws and the right to property that was, the scope of the right to property that was incorporated in the Fundamental Rights chapter. But those who have observed the constitutional developments around this legal economic concept of right to private property and the right of the state to acquire by giving reasonable compensation led to a series of amendments to the Constitution, many of which were struck down by Supreme Court. And at the end of the day, probably because we have not developed the adequate understanding of this symbiotic relationship, the right to property itself has gone out of the fundamental right guaranteed under the Constitution. I think if we were to take lessons from this episode, which is a great milestone in the development of Indian constitutional jurisprudence, underlying an economic concept which is to be balanced with concepts of equity and justice. That has given me some insight of this symbiotic relationship, which need to be looked at not merely through the literal interpretation of statutes, but through an interpretation that would subserve justice and fairness in the matter of property, private property, and compensation. A similar episode that has attracted me to the understanding of this symbiotic relationship was the Bhopal gas tragedy and the question of compensating the victims. More than 3,000 people dead, several thousand cattle also killed, a lot of damage to the environment. Ultimately, in terms of calculating the damages that the tortfeasor have to pay in such industrial torts or mass torts, we have failed miserably. Even though the government of India filed a suit in America for $3 billion as damages, it came down to 700 million when the ultimate deal was settled in the Supreme Court. Now we are reopening the whole thing. The question of calculating human lives in terms of money is something which needs to be developed by a jurisprudence which has to answer the principles of economics on the one hand and the principles of justice and equity on the other. So therefore, this is another unhappy episode of a total dysfunctionality between law and economics, as I read it, which is still being agitated. If you want a third episode from your own state, Maharashtra, what has happened to the Dhabol power plant and the Enron deal? I would argue that it is a failure to appreciate how legal deals will have to be struck with a clear understanding of the analysis of the economic components, right from fixing up the price of a unit of electricity. We could not negotiate the deal in a manner that is fair to the state of Maharashtra. With the result, we had to pay 300 million or whatever compensation to Enron without even producing a unit of electricity. So much so, from these various episodes which have shocked the conscience of the community, you will find that the failure was our not being able to appreciate the symbiotic relationship and preparing the institutional basis and the knowledge base. I used to say at that time that a planning commission which is formulating the economic policy is not in speaking terms with the law commission. So much so, you evolve a law to implement a new economic proposal, immediately it is challenged in court and it gets stayed. and the economic development is affected thereby. How do we prepare, therefore, appropriately the institutional structures and the knowledge base to be able to negotiate an appropriate deal, whether within government or outside the country, is a matter which law and economic scholarship will have to provide in future years. It became quite strikingly similar when the WTO appeared in the scene and the TRIPS agreement. Now, whether it is anti-dumping or any other imbalance in trade relations, if you have to represent the matter before the Dispute Resolution Forum of the World Trade Organization, my God, no lawyer will be able to do it unless he has a sound understanding, he is a critical consumer of knowledge of economics and accountancy and management. And to be able to analyze and appreciate, to make a presentation of the country's interest in an anti-dumping matter, you require that. And today, I understand because of the lack of such scholarship among the legal professionals in India, Government of India